All right. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Powering the Narrative, Communicating India's Energy Transition, which is also marking the launch of the Indian Energy Transition Series by the Heinrich Böll Foundation. My name is Jochen Lukschat, and I'm the director of the New Delhi office of the foundation. Today's gathering brings together communicators, researchers, civil society actors, journalists, academics, and policy practitioners. In other words, individuals who all shape how India's energy transition is understood, discussed, and ultimately carried forward. India is today one of the most dynamic spaces for energy transformation anywhere in the world. It's already one of the largest producers of renewable energy, and its energy demand continues to grow faster than in any other major economy. The Indian government's commitment to reach 500 gigawatts of non-fossil capacity by 2030 reflects both ambition and momentum behind the transition. It also highlights a significant opportunity as well as a challenge to build a cleaner, fairer, and more resilient energy future. But this transition is not only about technology, infrastructure, and policy frameworks. It's also societal transformation, one that shapes how people live, work, and plan for the future. How we communicate about the transition matters. Narratives affect how people understand it, whether they feel connected to it, whether they trust it, whether the change feels empowering or imposed. And narrative influence social acceptance, community engagement, and ultimately investment and policy decisions. It's in that spirit that we developed the Indian Energy Transition Series. It's a set of short explainer videos supported by curated links for further reading. Our aim is to make complex ideas accessible, to open the space for reflection, dialogue, and informed engagement. The first 5 videos are now available. They offer a foundational introduction, and we encourage you to explore them, use them in classrooms, workshops, media projects, policy conversations, or anywhere else where you see fit. We look at it as a living resource that we plan to expand over time, and we warmly welcome your feedback and suggestions that can help us shape future modules as well. This work has been developed against the backdrop of a long-standing collaboration between India and Germany on renewable energy and climate action. Germany's own energy transition shows that change is rarely linear. It evolves through experimentation, debate, contestation, and public dialogue. India's transition, meanwhile, is shaped by its own realities, its own development priorities, energy access demands, and the social and economic needs of people in various regions of the country. For the collaboration between India and Germany to remain meaningful, it's also essential that actors in both countries develop a rounded and nuanced understanding of India's energy transition, grounded in local experience and context. And this series is intended as a contribution to that shared understanding. Before closing, I would like to thank a number of people who made this project possible. First of all, my thanks goes to Kanchi Kohli, who guided the content development process, moderated the modules, and overall helped to shape the direction with much clarity and care. And Kanchi is also the person who will moderate the session here today. So big thanks to Kanchi. I'm also very grateful to our content producers, whose expertise informed all the modules. So a big thank you to the colleagues at Satat Sampada, Vasudha Foundation, ASA, the World Resources Institute, and iForest. And of course, a warm thank you also to my colleagues at the New Delhi office team, in particular Satya and Abhishek, who helped to move this from an idea on paper to actual implementation with a lot of energy and also persistence. And finally, my appreciation also goes to Sagarika Debnat, whose thoughtful visual design brought the content to life in a very beautiful, engaging, and accessible way. Today's event is not only the launch of a resource, it's also an invitation to broaden and deepen the conversation about India's energy future. So last but not least, I would also like to thank our speakers here today, and thank all of you for joining us. Please do explore the dossier on our website. Abhishek has dropped the link in the chat, and Abhishek, if you just want to share the site quickly, you can have a brief look at it and show you how that looks like. So that's the landing page where you see then, if you scroll down a little bit, all the 5 modules that you can explore. When you click in any of these modules, you will find at the top the explainer video of about 5 to 7 minutes, which is then followed by the key information that's presented in that video. And then at the bottom, you will find links to further reading. So please explore that resource, check it out, enjoy it, and give us feedback on what you think could be added. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you again for joining us, and I hand over to Kanchi to moderate the session of today. Thank you. Over to you, Kanchi.
Thank you, Okan, and thank you also for that wide acknowledgement to everybody who's been part of this process. It truly kind of sets the tone to understand that to power the narrative, you need a force, and you need a force of all kinds of people. So I think with that, I won't take too much time, but just basically introduce, why this, why communication as a lens to understand India's energy transition is what we thought as an important entry point into the discussion. And it's not communication only in the form of how, in some senses, it's communication in the form to understand three separate aspects. How does India's energy transition needs to be understood at one level? How is India's energy transition actually perceived within India as well as outside India? And third is that to really build the narrative, who all needs to be involved? Who are the diverse actors who need to be part of this narrative to make it much more holistic, inclusive, and not just in the policy space, in the education space, in the communication space, as well as the larger public space. And to do that, we have 3 great speakers today. Thank you, Shreya Adhikari, who's a communication specialist at India Development Review. Rixa Schwarz, Senior Advisor, Climate and Development at Germanwatch, and Gopal, Sarangi, Head of Department, Policy and Management Studies at TERI SAS. Thank you so much for the 3 of you to really lead us into this conversation, which is absolutely critical, even as we understand the technicalities of what the transition is, the perceptions, the communication, the narrative building of any transition actually, and in this case, India is absolutely crucial. We'll just go through this whole process in 2 parts, and I'll request each of you actually to take your first 5 minutes to try and unpack the perceptions and narratives around energy transitions. And Gopal, if I could start with you, if you could actually share what are the 2 or 3 big aspects which are important to foreground India's climate policy priorities, and within that, the energy transition. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very good afternoon, Kanchi ji and Yuken and all the team, those who have actually come up with this kind of idea. I'd like to start with 2 or 3 contestations, incompatibilities, which we're actually encountering when you talk about energy transition question in a larger scale. Let me try to minimize because we have only 5 minutes to speak about. So when you talk about energy transition question, I think the point that we need to understand very clearly is that the question of transition doesn't remain same when you look at all segments of the vertical space. Why is it so? Increasingly, what is being felt is that because one of the debates which is happening in the climate change space is the developmental priorities versus climate imperatives. And when we talk about developmental priorities versus climate imperatives, I like to kind of dissect it further at different segments. Why? Because what you talk about at an aggregated macro level doesn't really become the same thing when we actually bring it down, trickle it down to the decentralized level. And there are many examples coming up in that way. Let's, for example, we did some project looking at, if you look at the larger scale discussion, it is being told that developmental priorities essentially supersede over the climate priorities, which are also being spelled out in the larger goals of Government of India. Let's talk about, you have Viksit Bharat goal by 2047, developed India, and you also have goal of net zero by 2070. So in terms of timeline, there's also clear indication that yes, the developmental priorities actually gets more emphasis than the climate imperatives. But the question is, when you try to operationalize it at different levels, it actually gets much more complicated. I'll just given the time constraint, I want to give you a couple of examples of that. One example is basically when you talk about unfolding the decentralized energy solutions. Particularly, we did a project with the Kusum scheme looking at how the agro PV interventions actually, whether it's going to accentuate the inequality or it is kind of helping to reduce the prevailing degree of inequality. What comes out very clearly is that the legacy inequality not only continuing, it's getting accentuated further. Not in all places, but the case studies which have done in Rajasthan, some cases are very clearly indicating that without adequate policy measures, it may not lead to kind of expectation in terms of the social justice or inequality that I talk about. So I think there is some degree of inconsistency that's happening there. Second, when you talk about the energy transition question, we also talk, and that's in the larger umbrella, within the larger umbrella of climate imperatives. It's also need to talk about, as I think you rightly said, about inconsistencies and incompatibility in terms of how that's getting implemented. Let's, for example, the current, even the minister has clearly said that we need to slow down the renewable energy progression. Why? It's because you have transmission lines not available, whereas your solar projects are being built off. Because our targets are in terms of capacity building, not actual generation. So capacity building is happening, and consequently, you have also generation happening. The problem is that there is a time inconsistency problem. Earlier, this problem is not prevailing because when you put up a coal power project, so it requires 5 years, transmission line laying down would be requiring 5 years. So there is a kind of time consistency happening. Now you have more solar projects available, but no transmission line. So what do we do with that? So that's actually problem happening at an aggregate level. Similar questions also, if you look at the legal basis of this, because solar projects usually don't really need any EIA requirements, but transmission lines, they require it. So I think these are inconsistencies which are not happening. Now you can ask me why these problems are not appearing earlier. It's not happening, as I said, because that will look at these inconsistencies. Once you achieve the threshold level, you cross the 30-40% of renewable energy capacity, then you start, even non-fossil capacity they're talking about, you start encountering these kind of inconsistencies and incompatibilities. And these inconsistencies and incompatibilities are going to be accentuated further. Not only that, the problem is that when we actually look at these interventions, only technology-based intervention, because at all scales, technology and regulation market, the way they interact are very different. Because when you try to look at the technology market and regulation interaction at a higher level, that interaction may not be same when you bring that down to a decentralized energy level, or let's say at a lower level. And that is where you need to have these social issues coming up in a large way. So I think, I don't know, I'm expressing very clear because my mind is full of all those things, how the technology market and the regulation interacting at a higher level. When you talk about large scale, let's say utility scale renewable energy, that may not be exactly playing at the same level when you talk about, let's say, decentralized energy intervention. You need, let's say, you talk about social acceptance. So where is that happening at large scale? No, but you have to bring that upfront or dominantly when you talk about implementing some of these projects at the ground level. So those kind of disconnects are coming up now in a dominant way. It's primarily because of the fact that, as I said, that once you cross the 30-40% threshold level of renewable energy, it becomes no more a problem of energy. It becomes a problem of resources. It can be a problem of capital, natural capital, human capital, or let's say manufactured capital. It becomes a problem of policy integration. It becomes a problem of community. So energy problems cannot really continue as energy problem as you move ahead, having more and more of renewable energy when you talk about climate imperative. So climate imperative question are very much integrated with the development priorities in a very complex way. When you try to, if you look at the pyramidal structure, so it's actually getting more and more complex and go down to the lower levels of pyramid. So that is what actually we need to think about, because you cannot have a silos approach, cannot have a one size fits all solution at all levels of the particular segments of the implementation of this. I'll stop here because I can come back later. I think there are many interesting stuff coming up when we talk about this transition question, the climate imperatives and climate priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopal. Thank you for also sticking to time. I think there's so much to talk about this, from what you've also said, and I think what is also coming. And I think I'm hoping that this is just a teaser for what many, many more conversations that we will be having. Rixa, over to you. And I think zooming out of India and actually going from where you're located and seeing, the whole India-Germany cooperation on energy transitions and climate. I think from where you look at India's energy transition, what does the narrative look like? What should be the communication? Who should be in the room? Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kanchi. Greetings from Cologne and from Germany. I think the word teaser is a good description, what we can do in 5 minutes here, also when looking at the overall Indo-German relations on the topic. Well, you started by asking me what the bilateral relations are actually about. So I guess long-term cooperation between two countries are characterized by exchange on political, economical, cultural, increasingly security, but also social dimensions. And when we look at India and Germany, I think we can look back on many decades of cooperation or dialogue to advance the shared interests, manage also differences, but all to engage on building stability and prosperity in general. And these kind of bilateral relations usually build on mutual strategic interest. And I think we see all over the world that countries are looking for more reliable, stable partners in a geopolitical, complicated setting and more multipolar world. So these kind of relations often build on global shared challenges and interests. And we see that also the Indo-German relations look at implementing the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And those are good starting points for talking about just transition also, of course. The tools are, and I think that's important, not only government the dialogues and trade agreements, but also development cooperation, cultural exchanges, research partnerships, and also civil society exchanges. And I guess today we are part of that then. We have seen that in regard to climate, energy, and development, there are joint interests actually between India and Germany, for example, and I think that is on the top of the priority lists: renewable energies, green industrialization, decarbonization of various sectors, green hydrogen, but also the social and justice elements come in more, like energy access and the just transition. But we also see attempts towards energy security. And of course, we need to enable the financial flows in order to enable all of this. As I said, we look back at decade-long cooperation between India and Germany in these fields. And I would just like to point out to two more recent papers or strategies, partnerships that have been established. And the first one is the Green and Sustainable Development Partnership of 2022, which came in place basically as a framework or an umbrella to bring together the strategic and comprehensive cooperation in the field of sustainable but also green cooperation. And it actually also specifically mentions the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement that should jointly be implemented. What is important about it is the budget, I would say. There is a promise of Germany to allocate 10 billion euros over 10 years. So it's a somewhat longish period, making attempts plannable, but also building them on a good financial basis. It's also important that this partnership announces that it should bring together public and private sectors, but also civil society and research institutions. So again, it's important that these attempts are not purely governmental. And of course, we have also the just transition focus in it. So since this partnership was announced, there are a couple of initiatives that have been put in place, such as the Indo-German Renewable Energy Partnership or the Green Hydrogen Roadmap, the Program for Green Skilling, but also the Green Urban Mobility Partnership. So there are quite different approaches and that all come together under this partnership. And actually, there are quite a number of initiatives, programs, and projects. And finally, there is a dashboard online, which one can actually access and see which kind of projects are put in place. So to see where's the focus in the cooperation, but also how much money is allocated to which area of work. That is somewhat useful. I guess it could be more in depth and more transparent still, but that's a good start to have. The other paper that I would like to draw your attention to is the focus in India, which some say it's a strategy approach of Germany towards the cooperation with India. Others say it's rather maybe a summary of what is going on at the moment in the bilateral relations. And the top priorities that are listed there, and maybe that's no surprise that security has moved up on the priority list quite a bit. So security and defense cooperation play a much larger role nowadays, reflecting probably also the geopolitical situations. Then economic and trade relations have moved up also. And I guess we are all aware of the EU-India Free Trade Agreement that is negotiated right now. We also see that skilled labor and mobility migration cooperation is playing a larger role. And I guess the green skills hopefully come in there also as a part. And we see that climate, environmental, and sustainable development is, of course, still part, but it is kind of like not supported with the same kind of attention that it has been earlier. It is kind of seen that this has already been kicked off and it's running smoothly, so not too much of a focus to further underpin this at the moment. I think, well, at least from our perspective of Germanwatch, watching all these activities, I think one of our interests is to actually strengthen that. And that is probably also coming to the question of what I see missing at the moment. Yes, we need a better focus, a stronger focus again on climate and energy and development questions in these bilateral talks and initiatives. We need them explicitly, but we also need them cross-cutting. So if we see the focus areas of security, of trade, for example, then we need to have cross-cutting elements there as green standards, as justice standards, etc., and the human perspectives coming in there much more. You are probably aware also that there was an approach to negotiate a just energy transition partnership between the G7 and India, which failed. And I think we are still in the process of picking up the pieces of these negotiations, and it would be excellent to actually come back and create a larger vision, a larger joint strategy than what we have at the moment in the bilateral negotiations or relations for a JET or a just transition process. India was perceived as a very strong partner in these negotiations. Not to say a difficult partner. You can definitely see it the other way around also and say, as long as Indian interests are not respected in these kind of discussions, it's very hard to come towards a partnership agreement where actually both sides should be equally taking into account with the interests. I think I stop here. We have more to say about who should be in the room, and I think the role of civil society will play a large role there. Thank you for now.
Thank you, Rixa. That was, zooming out and looking at the whole bilateral relations in terms of and where is climate change actually located within those priorities itself. Actually, has been a very, very important learning. And without further ado, Shreya, over to you. And I think you're in a you are in a different space. You're also communicating to the public, to a different audience. And I think from where you are located, where would you locate India's energy transition right now? And exactly the same questions. Over to you.
Thanks, Kanchi. I think when it comes to a lot of the climate conversation currently, especially when we look at climate solutions, the narrative's heavily focused on energy transitions. And of course, this is very critical because it's an important part of how we mitigate the climate crisis. But what this currently ends up doing is it sidelines climate adaptation, and it also sidelines kind of other solutions like nature-led solutions or community-led solutions that are equally important. And then it makes the conversation extremely technical as well, because energy debates are usually heavy on modeling, costs, and targets and technology pathways. And so, while I was kind of reading up for the conversation today, I was looking up some headlines on energy transition in India. And some of the ones that popped out to me were, India achieved 50% of its installed electricity capacity, or XYZ group to invest, this much money in energy transition over the next 5-6 years, and so on and so forth. And something that stood out to me, most of these headlines were in a business journals, newspapers that carry business news. And a lot of these were focused on, say, gigawatt targets, investment numbers, or corporate ambitions. And so what this kind of ends up doing is makes the energy transition kind of seem like it's happening somewhere else, almost takes out, the solutions and kind of makes it look like that the energy transition is only possible in boardrooms or, with scientists, etc. And it doesn't really locate it within the everyday. And so it makes people feel like, it's not something that they anyway need to be interested in, or be reading up more about. And so I think we need to be asking, both as audiences and people working in the space, is where are these questions of, who benefits and who's bearing the cost and who's getting left out? Because the questions of whether the transition is fair, just, and rooted in people's realities is completely getting missed out or is getting boxed under, very rights-based reporting then. And the fact is that, questions of like local governance, consent, land rights, these are very critical if we want to ensure that the energy transition is also just. And so I think we need to explore how narratives can, one on energy transition and climate change, kind of bridge this gap that we're currently seeing, connect the very technical, which is also important, to the very human. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. I think it's been all three of you actually touched upon such critical aspects, and I think one of the questions for all of us who, the moment we problematize something, is that anyone who's engaged in the space is that what do we do about it? So I think automatically, then I think even if we are not able to resolve the whole set of problematizing or the scenarios that each one of us is actually working within right now, how do we, I mean, or for that matter, even if they're not specific, what is really needed to fill those strategic gaps for India's energy transitions? And I think some of the videos also bring that out, saying that, they say that, okay, these sectors are important to decarbonize, but it's easier here but there. So some of the problems are much more economic, some are more technological, the others are social. And so in this gamut of things, I think it'll be, if you could reflect on, what do you think is needed to fill those strategic gaps? And I think let's, if we can actually move, maybe you could go first, Rixa, and reflect on that. And I think because you were heading there in any case, sure. And then we can come back to you, Shreya and Gopal. I don't need to intervene, so we can just seamlessly just go through and we'll wrap up. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kanchi. As I hinted towards already, I would like to say a few words of what we mean when we, as Germanwatch and in cooperation with others, talk about civil society or non-stakeholder, non-state actor engagement in the just transition process, because I strongly believe that it is key to have everybody basically on board. Also, the Indian term that is more frequently used is people-centered energy transition, right? So it's, yes, the fairness plays in, but the fairness comes in when we actually engage people, everybody who's basically affected and concerned about the changes that are to come. So first of all, I think it is worthwhile looking at the who is who all is there and who can play a role. And when we say non-state actors, we actually talk about all kind of actors, from academic institutions, think tanks, NGOs, of course, community-based organization, social enterprises, but also microfinance institutions, technology providers, startups, grassroots networks, and also educational and communicational institutions. So I think the who is extremely broad and wide to get all the experiences on board, all the needs, all the small solutions that need to be created or are there already partially, all the capturing the learning and feeding that into the wider processes. I think there only in that way we can truly speak about a people-centered transition here. Also, only this kind of broad participation can bring equity and fairness and actually justice into the system. Only when we learn from these needs and really reflect the realities, I think we can come up with better solution. And I think what was already just mentioned, just transition is not only about switching the energy fuels in the systems, but it is also about adaptation and building resilience. And I think what comes in there quite strongly is also the look at more decentralized renewable energy systems. So not only looking about the large solar parks and of course also important the national transmission grids, but it is also the reach out to each and everybody and bringing resilience into the system, for example, through these decentralized renewable energies by really thinking about the smaller structures as well. And yes, I guess that it is important to cooperate also with research, bring in expertises, but also create transparency through communication, etc., sharing data, sharing best practice examples, and building upon all of that. I think only if we have these kind of bottom-up structures inbuilt in the larger attempts. So I'm jumping quite a bit here from talking about bilateral relations to on-the-ground realities and bringing in these various partners, but I believe that it is quite important. And of course, there can always be linkages also bringing in these experiences across North-South, South-South corporations and learn from each other here as well. Yeah, that's so much from my side. That is how I find it important to bring everybody on board.
Thanks, Rixa. Actually, that point about non-state actors is very important. And, you mentioned communicators, and I think it's so important when we're talking about communicating the energy transition and the climate crisis that local and regional reporters are also looked at, because a lot of times they are the ones communicating to communities who are the most impacted by the set transition. And it's therefore then important for at every level of reporting and communicating to have access to verified data, verified research, experts and scientists. And so I think bringing that kind of space into being and imagining kind of how everyone can work together and building that capacity, not only at the regional and local journalist level, but also within editorial rooms, I think is very important. Because while journalists and reporters can build, and there are a lot of fellowships right now that are kind of doing some of this work. There's a journalism network that's doing some of this work. While those are out there, I think it's also important to shift what the editorial buy-in is going to be, so that when reporters are communicating and pitching their story ideas, there's space for them and resources for them to be able to nuance the energy transition narrative as well. And there's also there's the access to data. So like Land Conflict Watch has, this sort of repository of data on how renewable energy projects, especially large solar parks, often kind of overlap with existing land use. So just more widespread kind of usage, accessibility to, resources like that. That's very important. And then I guess for civil society and local kind of reportage to work together, resources for that to kind of happen, where there's space for them to go into rooms where these conversations are happening, right? I think that's very critical. So I feel like journalists and local journalists can do a lot of this translation work that sometimes gets missed out between the science academia and the research that's put out, and what we end up seeing in mainstream newspapers and what's communicating off it. But I think there needs to be a little bit more editorial and institutional buy-in for some of the more nuanced stories to come out. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll come. I just want to highlight something very different. The point is that when we talk about communication, the important point that I'd like to highlight is in fact the presence of information asymmetry, the degree of information that is held by different actors at different levels. So the information asymmetry, both vertical information asymmetry and the horizontal information asymmetry, is very differently present when we talk about the stories around climate change and energy. Why is it so? Because in many cases, it's actually one-way flow, mostly top-down. You pointed about bottom-up. And when you try to bring in certain information which is happening at the top, and those information and contextualizing those information is very, very challenging when we talk about implementing that. So the information presence and then implementation happens a very different way. I can cite some interesting examples because this information asymmetry also creates market segmentation and increases the complexity of understanding that information when it comes to implementing at the ground. Rixa talked about people-centered transition, right? When you talk about people-centered transition, and it's more of what's happening at the ground level. But if you talk about, let's for example, you take it up, okay, scale up the people-centered transition at the top level. Certain things are actually, it's not related to how the people-centered transition is getting operationalized. I'll give an example of two examples. Let's, for example, you talk about CBAM, the impacts of UDR, European Union Deforestation Regulation, right? Mostly expected to be done by the farmers, right? But when it comes down to farmer, the entire information comes up with a very different way, right? So that creates the gap. That is one. Let me talk about also what's happening in the mesoscale, because when we talk about information asymmetry, segmenting the market, right? Let's say in Indian context, okay, each state would be a kind of a different market, right? And the problem is how within that market different actors are interacting is also very, very crucial for us to understand. I can give this example of how let's say you talk about energy, how the state electricity regulatory commissions are interacting with pollution control boards or state nodal agencies for renewable energy are very different when you look at different kind of markets. And those kind of segmentations also complicates the matter of information, further complicates how it's going to be implemented. You are rightly pointed this out, that information asymmetry, particularly the way you want to communicate, may not be same, right? And this communication is going to be more and more challenging, given the fact that subsectoral integrations are happening, either through technology or maybe through policy. Let's, for example, electricity sector is getting connected to transport, right? Or so these are essentially the way we like to understand how the information asymmetry is happening, and where is that it's happening, at what level, when is that happening, who is actually contributing to that. I think that if you come back to what Kanchi pointed this out, that what can be done, I think the first thing that you need to understand that, because as I said, that the pace and speed of information at the top level is much faster than what's happening at ground level. Can you bridge that gap? Because you talk of energy sector, you talk of climate change, all are very dynamic. The degree of dynamism at the top level in the vertical line is very different than the degree of dynamism at the bottom level. Can you bridge that? At least the information communication is same around, at least balanced out. And then you talk about implementation. I think these are some thoughts which I'm basically trying to understand what could possibly be done, what are the way forward when you talk about a large country like India, and when you talk about climate change issues getting translated or trickling down to the bottom level. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, it's fantastic to have such clear communicators in a webinar that, the task of the moderator is much simpler. Everyone who's actually attending, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A because we have about 10-15 minutes for that conversation. I'm going to try and use my next 2-3 minutes while those questions are coming in to summarize a very, very rich conversation that has happened. And I'll repeat, this is just the beginning, I hope, of doing many such unpacking that we're trying to do. In fact, when we were putting together these videos itself, that this information asymmetry, what we can actually put together, how should it be framed itself, was a big question in itself. And because it was a collaborative exercise, there was a very interesting mix of how to understand even how each person who's contributing to this process is thinking about it. So I think that itself was a nice window to curate something like this. So I mean, I feel privileged to be part of it and to have learned through it. But I think to quickly come back to and just to wrap up what all of you are trying to bring out, I think some really very clear important themes really emerge. One is, I think we need to start recognizing and understanding some of those strategic gaps. And I think alongside recognizing is the first step to be able to try and upstream it, from the point of about actually trying to deal with the transmission question only after the renewable energy capacity has been built up, or trying to understand some of the social justice concerns only after some of them start emerging when you're trying to ground the debate. I think those are the kinds of things that upstreaming the gaps and inconsistencies actually are very critical, so that they don't get accentuated at a time when you don't want them to be get accentuated. So I think that is one part of reshaping the narrative that we need to that all of you really pointed out in what you were saying. The second is, I think, just immediately taken from this is the social acceptance questions. And I think this is not just about beyond public and government. It is within government and government. It is with across India in the global scenario. Within different Indias, I think all those social acceptance questions need to be brought out. Globally, there are shared challenges. and there is a need for stability in the era of turmoil. And within that, I think how the climate narrative can be, or can it be actually a good lens through which we actually try and create that stability through the turmoil. I think those are can the climate discourse be embedded in that global turmoil is also very is it still an important strategy to be able to address the global shared challenges? And the fourth point, I think, amongst all the other complex challenges that you all brought out, was this about are climate solutions really a matter of only boardrooms? And I think where the discussion on climate solutions, whether it is the aspect of what should be prioritized at the scale at which it should be prioritized, all of that is not just an implementation question, it's a design question. And I think those are important things in all of it. It's a running thread in all of your points that you were bringing out. So yeah, I guess I'll just end by saying that I guess this is not just about horizontal or vertical. It may not also be only about the circular. We may need much more diffused form of really both understanding the problem and also being able to address those in any energy transition, including India's. So I'll stop there. I hope there are a few questions, and I'll just open that up and see. Yeah, so there is one a question definitely here. What needs to be done to improve financing mechanisms like credit, microfinance, or blended finance that makes DRE solutions affordable and investable for rural India? DRE, I presume, is decentralized renewable energy. Financing appears to be a big challenge, particularly small farmers. How can the implementation of state-sponsored schemes be improved? So thank you, Shubham Das Chaudhary, for this question. Any one of you would like to take it, or all of you would like to take it, it would be great.
Well, if nobody comes
Can I?
in,
Yeah, please, Rixa, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be short and I'll let you compliment. I'm not really a finance expert, but since I brought the decentralized renewable energies up and the international financing schemes, I guess I need to say one word about it. Well, if we talk about communication, I think the key point is mainstreaming the ideas of decentralized renewable energies and just transition efforts to make even smaller banks, etc., and financial investor actors aware of these solutions. And I think in the financial scheme, de-risking of these kind of approaches is extremely important. I think the larger renewable settings are basically running by themselves at the moment, but it is the financial risk that is implied with the decentralized ones, with the smaller solutions, that is not making them fly as they should at the moment. And I think there are approaches being worked out, but maybe Gopal knows more about them.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add on what you said, basically, because this question actually requires a separate discussion altogether. Just to throw some light, I just don't really want to understand this question from the demand side rather than supply side, because the question of financing the transition or financing climate change requires better, as I said, as all of us have said, about the information, rule of accepting, social acceptance and all that. All these are dependent primarily on the supply side considerations. And the supply side challenges usually comes in terms of defining what exactly we mean by green. Why banks are not coming forward to lend to the farmers or any other actors who want to do some change. It's basically, the problem is that there is no clear definition of what exactly connotes green or what are the green activities. Why is it so? And this also boils down to the question that if you really want to segment the climate change considerations into two parts, mitigation and adaptation, and particularly in Indian context, mitigation, yeah, India is doing enough, but the adaptation front, there is less money. there is a reason behind it, but mitigation activities can be converted into profit-oriented activities. So private sector is venturing into it quickly. Adaptation activities are not. Adaptation activities are you do not know. There is a large degree of uncertainty, and there is also this question of large degree of presence of externalities, called that in economics. So even if you want to put the money, the benefits are not limited to you. It might be accrued to somebody else. So there is a less financing options available for climate adaptation. I think the supply side questions are yet to be resolved. As long as supply side questions are not resolved, you cannot think of bringing blended. We keep on writing about blended finance, microfinance, but you also need to understand microfinance for what? The same question of information, same question of communication, clearly communicated what exactly we mean by green. Then only probably banks and non-banking financial institutions come forward and give you the kind of money that's required to be invested in those sectors. Just want to highlight, because this problem, as I said, is quite a large problem, requires probably another day of webinar and discussing larger issues around that. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. I think while we wait for some more questions, I think one of the things, even while listening to all of you, as well as the experience of putting together, this whole process, and I think some of the colleagues, Sadia and others who've been part of this process, Abhishek, who to really put this together. I think one of the things that that strikes us in the communication, the narrative point of view, and I think that also determines who's really engaging with the idea of energy transition, is the language. I think even as you all were talking right now, the language in which we talk about, so the language of climate change at least has been much more made public. People understand impacts. They're you being able to find terminology for it. But the lexicon and terminology on energy transitions, particularly, is still a very technocratic and a little you're very wary in terms of, I don't understand this, so I can't talk about it. But when you really try and understand, it's like, okay, this is not that difficult to understand. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with it? And if we deal with it, does it really can it really actually help address some of the structural gaps that all three of you really brought out? So I'll open it to the three of you, and if you can reflect on it.
Shreya, do you like to go first?
I mean, I think it's basically coming from some of what you said about how there's an asymmetry of information and how it's very top heavy. I think the question is, who is this information being, when we're writing about the energy transition, who are we really talking to? If we're going to continue talking to industrialists and businessmen and scientists, then it's great. Then it's doing the work that it's doing. But if we really need for the energy this 50 gigawatts of power to be translated to what it means for my everyday, if we really need to start talking about solar panels on rooftops, etc., then we really need to think about the person who's going to be consuming this information, right? And I come back to then that point of the and to also the point that was made, that the structural gaps that already exist, they're just highlighted then with the way the information is presented currently. So can it be made possible that the capacity is built in a way, and access to information is built in a way that for the local journalists and the reporters and the communicators of even think tanks and research organizations who are doing a lot of the talking and presenting of the research that's coming out, can they also ground these in everyday realities, and then capacity is built across the board for even the people who need to communicate it? But yeah, I think it's a bit of a, these are things that need to happen. How do they happen is a bit of a question that all of us, I think, are grappling with a little bit. But I'll pass it on to Rixa and Gopal in case, you have slightly clearer points.
I completely agree with you. I think it's important for us to understand that who is communicating at what level, I think we're talking about local journalists or those who are even at the school level. Okay, so if that gets translated into some acceptable languages at a school level, at a local journalists are communicating that to people that are interacting those kind of changes, I think that will be a good way of doing that. The other thing which I was thinking about, learning by doing. Let's, for example, who is the last mile user of these kind of changes that are happening? And what is the kind of distance? Let's, for example, talk about somebody using a solar panel or somebody using a, let's say, improved cook stoves, right? So somebody who is the user and the last person who's delivering that. So what kind of interaction is happening there? What is the way of interacting them? How this is impacting them? I think that does matter. In addition to that, there is also this, I draw this example because I was in TERI working in decentralized energy projects, we experienced some kind of spillover effects. What exactly does mean that these are the interventions which actually kind of creates a lot of information asymmetry. As long as your neighbor is not doing it, you don't do that. So the confidence comes when somebody is deploying a new system in your locality. So bring or build your own confidence. So I think the information, even though it's not about communicating, it's about indirectly communicating the message by deploying something which is completely new in a locality, and that message passes on to the others. I think these are the way we need to establish some, let's, for example, kind of thinking of model villages now, model solar villages. So I think those are the initiatives, those could possibly create better communication compared to what we have been doing, like more top-down, and Kanchi mentioned about vertical circularity. All these, they don't really work. What works is actually what they learn in the ground and their positive implications. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopal. Rixa, before I come to you, I think this is to add the next question, which is also speaking to this topic, and I think if you and others could include it, is that, basically young people, Ayan Singh Jamwal is asking that young people in future generations will play a central role in India's energy transition, but young people get the least funds, the last freedom to innovate, and not to mention the least structural decision-making power. What are the cultural or narrative shifts that will help older generations meaningfully collaborate with the youth? So I think that is itself, it's very much part of that language shift and all that you both been talking about. So over to you.
Okay, thanks. Maybe just a quick thought on your previous question. I definitely see the communication challenge as well, but I think if we have managed to communicate something as abstract as climate change, greenhouse gases not being visible, climate being 30 years of weather statistics, etc., then I think it might be even easier to talk about just energy transitions because, solar panels are visible. You can touch them. I think it's easy to understand how they work, and you immediately see the benefits also. So I do have some hope that bringing it down to people and also connecting it to people-centered and just aspects, which everybody has something to say about, it might be easier. Still, I think that mainstreaming and getting the narratives right is really important. And I guess our discussion here and also the produced videos contribute to that. So that is great. Now to the generational question. Absolutely right. I think the young generations need to play a large role in the transition processes, not only because it's about their future, but I also believe that the freedom, picking up that word from the question of thinking, of innovation, is actually there. So I do hope that the spaces that are necessary for the younger generations will be opening up, probably by being informed and bringing in good ideas and contributing to the solutions. At least I believe that if substance is coming in from all kinds of groups, then the space is also given. And again, our communication hopefully enables that. And yes, probably I should have mentioned young generations explicitly also when I spoke about civil society participation. So totally agree that there is a huge role to play and that all of us probably have a responsibility in opening up those spaces too.
Thank you, Shreya, Gopal. Any quick thoughts before I hand it over to Sadia to take us to
No,
the
I
close?
think it is already, Rixa has captured the essence of the role of youth. I think fonts should not come in between. I think most important point we have been discussing in this webinar, very critical when you try to connect youth with the world, is basically the communication. That matters much than the funding kind of a discrepancy which is being created.
Yeah, I think the one point that I'd just like to add is that I think young people are doing a lot because they've actually, a lot of people around me and younger generations have managed to take social media and use it as a very important platform of communication. And I think that's where some of the shift will start and happen if it's used and leveraged properly. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. I think, thank you. And I think the question is bang on. I think one is, of course, the responsibility of the young people, but it's also the responsibility of all those who tired out in this whole space to be able to say, okay, we need to collaborate. There is some knowledge, and there is a lot of enthusiasm, and there is a knowledge base even there. So I think the idea is to build the narrative not just through one lens, but through those diverse lenses, and help us land somewhere. I think that's the whole thing, and I think all these questions also really prompt us that it needs to be much more collaborative across generations, across social structures, across thematic areas, etc. So I think it's been great to speak and be able to be part of this process. Over to you, Sadia, to take us to the close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kanchi, and thank you so much also to all the panelists who are here with us today. Are the starting ideas that we had while developing this curriculum. I think the seed of the idea was, I think, almost was sown 2 years back, and we were just discussing what can we say and communicate which hasn't been said around energy transition. There's already so much literature, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of books, a lot of conversations that are already happening around energy transition in India. So what can we say that is different and that could appeal to across people and stakeholders and people whoever is interested in the energy transition of India. So the idea to kind of having this curriculum, a series which touches upon different aspects of energy transition, and also kind of moves beyond what all of you have already said, the technological, the regulatory, and very technical kind of discussions that were already happening, but are very, very relevant, but also talks about also moves beyond coal. Again, energy transition, always coal, shifting away from coal. So the idea that we had was to kind of create this, which talks about but are also not coming together to kind of weave a kind of a tapestry which is more holistic and more inclusive, and touches upon different aspects of energy transition, right from your just transition discourse to the aspect of having women also as major not only the recipients of energy transition, but also with agency in the energy transition that is happening around them, and who have been left behind, people who have been left behind in the transitions that have happened in the past. So the curriculum touches upon all of those briefly, and I'm very glad that the conversations that we had today also kind of brought together these different nuances in the discourse around energy transition. We talked about technology, the inconsistencies and the incompatibilities, and the development imperatives versus the climate imperatives, and how these conversations need to be brought together and doesn't need to be happening in silo, so that we could facilitate the social, reshape the narrative, and also kind of facilitate a social acceptance around the transition, and bridge the gap not only between the stakeholders but also among people who are interested and could contribute to the transition, and not necessarily in a way that just by kind of knowing about it and being aware of it. And so yeah, I think it was a very, very useful conversation. And again, thank you very much to all the panelists, to Kanchi, to moderate it so well. And I would again invite all of you to look at the curriculum, the series, which is live on our website now. And I would also want you to please give us feedback around it, and if you would want, what do you like, what do you don't like, and if you want more of these videos, and use them in your work, in your research, in your advocacy, and also let us know about it. And once again, thank you so much to all the people, also all the partners who have helped supported us in the making of these videos, and my colleagues Abhishek, Sagarika, and Anhad, who also helped develop these videos. Thank you so much. Abhishek, do you want to share the screen, or we could close here just for people to get a sense of the page? But I think we've already done that. So yeah, thank you so much. And we would await your feedback and your comments around the videos and the series. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for steering it too. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.